Chapter 6, Part 1 Notes: Population Biology Growth Rates. The population growth is determined by many different factors. The first factor that we look at when we talk about population growth is the biotic potential. In textbook definition, this is the unrestrained biological reproduction rate. What this really means is how many offspring can a member of a population have in a given time span. For the human race, our population has set limits. Females of certain ages are only able to reproduce. And even at that, we can only reproduce every 9 months. This would then be able to equate our biotic potential. Another thing that determines population growth is carrying capacity. No matter how much a species can reproduce, an ecosystem can only handle so many of those species living there at a time. This is the carrying capacity, the number or biomass of a species that can be supported without depleting the resources of an ecosystem. Sometimes this can be considered density-dependent or density-independent. Density-dependent factor means that the growth rate depends on the population's density, so as more individuals increase, this becomes a higher priority factor in population growth. An example of this would be a food source. As more individuals enter a population, the need for food goes up, so the resource becomes depleted. A density-independent factor is one that will affect the population size regardless of how many individuals are in the population. This is any kind of abiotic disturbance, such as a natural disaster, storm, hurricane, flood, earthquake, fire. These are all examples of density-independent factors. When we look at the biotic potential and the carrying capacity combined, we can see a model of what the population growth would look like in an area. There's two different types of population growth. The first type of population growth is called exponential growth. We see this as a J-shaped curve on our graph. In this population, the population grows quickly at first when food is available, but then most likely is represented by a crash, which is a rapid dieback, after the population has exhausted and reached its carrying capacity. You can see on the image at the bottom that there's a population that continues to go back and forth between high and low populations, while the blue line in the middle represents the carrying capacity. When the population maxes out above the carrying capacity, there's a dieback, but the population is yet to reach the stable level of the carrying capacity, so it continues to oscillate between high and low populations until it can find a stable median. The second type of population growth is what we call a logistic growth. This is referred to as an S-shaped or sigmoidal curve. This is when the population growth will actually slow as it reaches carrying capacity. Initially, the growth will look like an exponential growth pattern, but then as the population reaches the carrying capacity, it will level off. Usually these populations will not exceed carrying capacity or will waver slightly below and above carrying capacity. To figure out how these populations grow, we look at simple things like the rate of growth, which we represent with the letter R, the time, which is the generations, or time between each generation. This is usually expressed as T0, T1, or T2. T0 being the beginning, the first generation, T1 being the second generation, and so forth. A capital N is representative of the population, the number of individuals in that population. Capital K represents the carrying capacity. You can see on the side the two equations for exponential growth and logistic growth. There are two different types of species that we determine when we talk about population growth. We have R-selected species and K-selected species. The table on the right is also detailed in your book to tell you the characteristics of each type of species. R-selected species are characterized by high population reproduction and growth rates. These are usually populations that don't have predators or disease and will overshoot their carrying capacity and then experience a dieback. R-selected species usually go through an exponential growth pattern. However, K-selected species usually have a conservative reproduction model and takes longer times in between reproduction. This means that the growth slows as it reaches carrying capacity, and K-selected species will model a logistic growth pattern. Finally, we look at our equation to make our population model. Our population rate of growth, represented by R, equals a simple equation: births plus immigrations minus deaths minus emigrations. Remember that immigration means the individuals coming into a population, and emigration means the individuals leaving a population. When we factor all of this information together, we end up getting our rate of population growth.